Hi, welcome back to Rocky Mountain Prepper. I'm Bellum. Today we are working on our Strong Foundation series. We are in the book of Exodus, and it's chapter 13. Alright, I don't really have any historical notes at the moment. I do have some geographic notes that we will get to in a second when it comes to it. Alright, so let's get started. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Set apart to me all the firstborn, the one opening the womb among the children of Israel, among man and among beast, it is mine. And Moses said to the people, Remember this day in which you went out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery, for the strength of the hand of Yahweh brought you out of this place, and whatever is leavened shall not be eaten. Today you are going out in the new moon, Abid. And it shall be, when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hevites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this new moon. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day is a festival to Yahweh. Unleavened bread is to be eaten the 7 days, and whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you, and leaven is not to be seen within all your border. And you shall inform your sons that in that day, saying, It is because what Yahweh did for me when I came up from Mitzrayim. And you shall guard this law at its appointed time, from year to year. And it shall be, when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall give over to Yahweh every one opening the womb. Every firstborn that comes from your livestock, the males belong to Yahweh. But every firstborn of a donkey you are to ransom with a lamb. If you do not ransom it, then you shall break its neck, and every firstborn man among your sons are to be ransomed. And it shall be, when your son asks you in time to come, saying, What is this? Then you shall say to him, By strength of hand Yahweh brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. And it came to be, when Pharaoh was too hardened to let us go, that Yahweh killed every firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both the firstborn of men and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I am slaughtering to Yahweh every male that opens the womb, but every firstborn son I ransom. And it shall be as a sign on your hand, and as fontanelles between your eyes, for by strength of hand Yahweh brought us out of Mitzrayim. And it came to be, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that Elohim did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, though that was nearer. For Elohim said, Lest the people regret when they see fighting and return to Mitzrayim. So Elohim led the people around by the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds. That's oftentimes translated as the Red Sea. From a military standpoint, let's just look over here at the board. Let's zoom in. Okay. Here in the Egyptian Delta, in the Nile Delta in Egypt, you do have a lot of bodies of water that are covered with reeds. They're small seas of reed. But that doesn't make sense. Because if they're crossing one of those to get away, Pharaoh's army could just go 200-300 yards within sight of them, around the body of what is normally the body of water, and flank them. Go around them and hit them from the side and wipe them out. Down here in the Sinai Peninsula, you have what's known as the Red Sea Wilderness, or the wilderness of the Red Sea. It is surrounded here and here by mountains. Now down here, there's a big open plain right at the tip, right at the Strait of Tiran. Right up here, there's a small plain. Both of them have easy access across the sea, with water no deeper than 200 feet. Up here, on both sides, you have, of this land bridge, you have deep trenches, because this red line represents a fault line going right down the middle. This fault line is pulling apart the two continents, the African plate and the Eurasian plate. So, right here, there is a land bridge. Now, it would have been very possible for God to just part the waters there. That would have been easy. But the seismic activity, which we have discussed, which I believe God used to trigger all the plagues, would have caused a shifting of the plates. And it has been seen in the past that when the plates are shifting, along zones like this, where they're pulling apart, you can have one side rising higher than the other. In fact, the African plate, it's theorized, could have risen as much as 400 feet up. And this would have become a channel of relatively dry ground, sloping down to Saudi Arabia. And over in here is one of the best sites for the for Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. In fact, right along here is actually the ancient site of Midian. So Moses, when he fled Egypt, came all the way down here. And then the backside, from his point of view as being raised an Egyptian, the backside of the wilderness, into the wilderness, would have taken him to Mount Horeb, over here. So, going through the wilderness of the Red Sea would have taken him here. Because there's no actual trails going down here. You'd have had to follow along the coast. Now, that would have been just fine for him. He would have been hemmed in up here by mountains, blocked by the sea down here, and over here, and then they couldn't retreat because of the Egyptians. Here, they're hemmed in up here and down here by mountains. And they had nowhere to go. So God performed one of his greatest saving miracles. So Elohim led the people by the way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds, and the children of Israel went in fives from the land of Mitzrayim. That's just, if you're military, you'd understand this. It's a column of fives. 5 rows of people. As many far back as you need. It is very efficient. You'd have one person at the very front, and then they could keep an eye on that person as they go. And everyone just follows. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he certainly made the children of Israel swear, saying, Elohim shall certainly visit you, and you shall bring my bones from here with you. We read that back in the end of Genesis, and we've already discussed this. Back over in Avaris, the temple complex, the burial complex, that had a small pyramid. In it, there was a broken statue. The stone sarcophagus was empty, and by the way that the lid was sitting down, they could tell, the archaeologists could tell, that it was not ransacked. It was lovingly placed. Opened. Right here it says it. They took his bones. They took his sarcophagus. The golden sarcophagus of Joseph was taken out of Egypt with them. And Yahweh went before them by day in a column of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a column of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. Now, over here in the wilderness, it would take a person or a group roughly 3 days to go from over here from Shechem down there. It would take the 3 days. It would take about 3 days to get there. The column of cloud did not cease by day, nor the column of fire by night, before the people. 14. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi-Horoth, between Migdal and the sea, opposite Bel-Zephon, camp before it by the sea. Those are all right around that area. Right up there where I had pointed. Where I have the X. For Pharaoh shall say of the children of Israel, they are enslaved in the land, in the wilderness, as in the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Like I said, mountains north, mountains south, sea to the east, Pharaoh to the west. And I shall strengthen the heart of Pharaoh, and he shall pursue them. But I am to be esteemed through Pharaoh, and over his army, and the Mitzrayites shall know that I am Yahweh. And they did so. And it was reported to the sovereign of Mitzrayim that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people, and they said, Why have we done this? What we have left Israel, that we have let Israel go from serving us. So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. He took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Mitzrayim with officers over them. All right, that we know from historical sources that's close to 4,000 chariots. That's a large army there, and they never traveled just the chariots. They always had infantry with them. It would have been a big mass of people going. And Yahweh strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, sovereign of Mitzrayim, and he pursued the children of Israel. But the children of Israel went out defiantly. And the Mitzrayites pursued them, and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi Heroth, before Baal-Zephon. And then Pharaoh when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes and saw the Mitzrayites coming up after them, and they were greatly afraid. So the children of Israel cried out to Yahweh. If you saw 4,000 chariots and close to 10,000 infantry and archers coming at you, you would ask God for help too. I know of special forces guys that would drop to their knees praying to God, seeing that kind of an army coming. It is not something you fight unless you have an equal army. Even if you have a smaller army, you're still probably toast. And they said to Moses, "Did you take us to die in the wilderness because there were no burial sites in Mitzrayim? What is this you have done to us to bring us out of Mitzrayim? This is not the word that we spoke to you in Mitzrayim, saying, 'Leave us alone.' Oh, is it not the word that we spoke to you in Mitzrayim, saying, 'Leave us alone and let us serve the Mitzrayites'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Mitzrayites to die in the wilderness." Quite often God calls the people of Israel a stiff-necked people. And they follow this pattern. Something bad starts happening and they complain. Oh, something's bad's happening. I'm going to complain. I'm going to complain. I'm going to complain. They don't get the point. Knock it off and let God do his work. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the deliverance of Yahweh, which he does for you today. For the Mitzrayites whom you see today are never to see again. You are never to see again. Yahweh does fight for you and you keep silent." And Yahweh said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them go forward. And you, lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and let the children of Israel go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I am strengthening the hearts of the Mitzrayites, and they shall follow them, and I am to be esteemed through Pharaoh, and over all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Mitzrayites shall know that I am Yahweh, when I am esteemed through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." And the messenger of Elohim, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and a column of cloud went out from before them and stood behind them, and came between the camp of the Mitzrayites and the camp of Israel, and the cloud and darkness, and it gave light by night, and the one did not come near the other all the night. So God was actually blocking the path of the Mitzrayites. It wouldn't have been that hard for God. The path is actually fairly narrow. Some spots you can only get one chariot through. uh, given the size of the Egyptian chariots, it was about maybe a yard and a half wide from hubcap to hubcap. It wasn't that wide. Some spots you could only get one through. Just before, when you can see the shore, when you can see this open field, this beach, it widens out so you can get maybe 3 chariots wide through there before it just opens up into into this giant beach. But you go through there and you have a big huge pillar of fire or a big huge pillar of smoke. Horses aren't going to go through a dense cloud of smoke. They're smart. They don't like it. It smells like fire. To them, fire smells like death. It triggers their instinct to panic. So the Egyptians couldn't move all night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and it made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Now, because of that passage, a lot of people say, oh, it was wind set down in these shallow lakes. No. If the African plate lifted, the east wind would have dried out that channel, that land bridge. They would have felt they probably, while they were going through the mountains, felt a little shaking. And it could have been a combination of the uplift of the African plate and the wind, and then wind set down. But that's 4 miles. There's never been a case where there's been more than a mile of water pushed away through wind set down. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right and their left. They could have looked over the sides and seen these trenches, and it would have looked to them like it was a wall of water, straight down. It doesn't say the wall was straight up, like you see in the Charleston Heston 10 Commandments. No, it's like a wall of water, okay? You look down, you see water straight down. It looks like it's a wall. At least that's my interpretation. And the Mitzrayites pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea. All the horses of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Followed them would have been the infantry and archers. And it came to be in the morning watch that Yahweh looked down upon the army of the Mitzrayites through the column of fire and cloud, and he brought the army of Mitzrayites into confusion. And he took off their chariot wheels, and they drove them difficultly. It wasn't even ground, and they were losing wheels. That would have stopped the pursuit, because you get all the chariots plugging up the channel. They can't go around because it's a steep drop off into the water, and in heavy armor, you sink. And the Mitzrayites said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Yahweh fights for them against the Mitzrayites." The army realized, this is not a good situation. We're losing here, and they haven't fired a shot. What's going to happen when they turn and fight us? So the infantrymen would have started to go, but they're in the middle of this 4-mile stretch. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its usual flow. At the break of day, with the Mitzrayites fleeing into it, thus Yahweh overthrew the Mitzrayites in the midst of the sea. The middle. So they hadn't even gotten out, and then the African plate dropped back to its normal spot, because up top it slipped where it's being subducted. It slipped back through. There would have probably been an earthquake up near Greece. But then this bulge right here dropped, and all the water comes rushing back in. Hundreds of millions of tons of water crashing down on you. Even if you could swim, you would have died. It would have crushed your body. They found on both sides of that site, they found chariot wheels covered with coral. They found arrowheads, swords, spear points. All the equipment of the Egyptians. I think they've even found some helmets and some armor. The bodies would have been eaten by fish. For years, there would have been bodies floating to the parts of body, well, months at least. Bodies would have been floating to the surface onto both sides, all around the... You see, this whole area is the Red Sea. This is the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, back then it was the Red Sea. This was the Red Sea back then. This whole body of water used to be known as the Red Sea. They didn't distinguish parts of it as different seas or different gulfs. And the children of Israel walked on dry ground. Thus Israel... Oh wait, and the waters returned to cover the chariots and the horsemen and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them, and not even one was left of them. And the children of Israel walked on dry ground in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right and on their left. Thus Yahweh saved Israel that day out of the land of Mitzrayim, and Israel saw the Mitzrayites die on the seashore. That's just basically saying, and the Israelites were on the sea, on the shore, watching the Egyptians die. And Israel saw the great work which Yahweh had done in Mitzrayim, and the people feared Yahweh and believed Yahweh and his servant Moses. Okay. You can't have them going across a lake, because Egyptians were smarter tacticians than that. You have all the settings for them to cross right there. You even have geological events that have shown it in the past, where land has risen up hundreds of feet and then dropped suddenly. It's all... God has worked within the realm of our current knowledge of science. The whole point of this story, of this bit here, is you don't fight God. If you try, God will win every single time. God oftentimes drags us along to his plans, kicking and screaming. I mean, the people of Israel didn't want to leave. They were comfortable in their slavery. So what happened? God drove them out by a mighty hand. Now, Pharaoh had taken his entire army. And unlike some pharaohs, the pharaohs of this dynasty, just before the second interim period, they would journey with the army and then watch from behind. They had people using flags to signal the army, but they didn't go into battle. Dudamas lost his entire army. The real punishment to the Pharaoh was not recorded in the Bible. Egypt had lost its economy by this point because of the plagues. They had no crops. Their people were starving. They had no army left. A massive portion of their population was wiped out. And they didn't suffer the worst of it. Pharaoh returned to his palace, defeated. And then 5 years later, Pharaoh Dunamis was killed by the Hyksos invasion. They came into his palace, they killed him, killed his wife, killed his children, and declared themselves the rulers of Egypt. That was Pharaoh's punishment right there. Because Dunamis allowed them to be enslaved and didn't let them go. When Dunamis took power, he had the power to actually free them and say, you're no longer slaves, but I still want you to work for me. We'll pay you. He could have done that. He should have done that. But he didn't. He liked it. He liked the free labor to build his store cities. Because he was a warrior. He did lead his army. He did take his army out, and they did get tribute from conquered people. When you don't follow God, and you're a ruler, God will lay you low. He will take you down. He will drop you down a peg. In this case, the mighty have fallen greatly. Okay, if I don't stop here, I'm going to go on for another hour, and I'll save the next bit for later. So, for now, like always, good luck, and God bless.